And we left off talking about, and I'm glad that we got into such depth because I've been telling a lot of my friends too about it, about how interesting I thought it was, our last discussion about how masking sociopathy is different in Asia. And there were three main reasons. Let's see if I can even remember them off the cuff. One of them is the word psychopath doesn't really have the same sort of definition or meaning. Like it's not in the common parlance of Asian speaking, or not Asian speaking, but Asian countries. And you went through various languages that didn't have that word. Another one is that the norms are so explicit that they're easy to follow because there's not any passive aggressiveness or trying to guess at what the norms are. So, I mean, I appreciate that from Mormonism, is that the norms are super easy to follow. It's just like really straightforward. Here's what we're doing. And so that's good. And then the third one, oof, man. Oh, the third one is, it's actually probably my favorite one, is that emotional displays, individual emotional displays from a person are kind of frowned upon as being an unnecessary burden on the community. That you, yeah, by giving the emotional display, you're requiring everybody to react to you. You know, it's kind of like in, at least I think the English speaking world, we often say, hi, how are you? And if somebody says something other than fine, then it's like, like, okay, I didn't actually mean for you to go into a long story. You know, in fact, maybe we don't have the time for me to hear exactly how you are. So I think that is kind of also true, an expectation in the English speaking world. At least when people are like, you know, like when you're talking to the grocery store person, it's seen as being a burden and inappropriate for you to kind of like get into your emotional world while you're interacting with the bank teller, grocery store person. And so it seems like that's just a little bit more expansive in Asian cultures. Does that sound right?
Yes. So do you have any follow-up question on what we previously discussed?
No, I just think it's fascinating. I'm like super glad that you explained that last week. I thought, wow, this is super interesting. It makes a lot of sense, and I can also see why, you know, it's kind of because I guess somebody forwarded me. There's been either a new proposed antisocial personality disorder kind of definition, or it has been enacted. I actually didn't follow up. I probably should have. It's been a crazy summer, right? But in it, they took out the criminality. They said, you know, criminality itself is not at all related to the diagnosis.
Yeah,
Right?
about time they do.
Yes, they made it super explicit. You know, it has nothing to do necessarily with criminality. And, you know, we have to stop kind of like looking at criminal markers as being markers of whether or not somebody has a personality disorder, particularly because things that are criminal are different culturally, right? So that's kind of what I was thinking about, is when I read that, is like, you know, every manifestation of a personality disorder is going to be different based on the culture, the gender, the age, you know, the ethnicity, the et cetera, all the underlying things that are going to kind of manifest themselves. And so I thought it is kind of weirdly ethnocentric and Western centric to kind of see psychopathy as being this limited thing, you know, the types of things that you experience perhaps in your own culture, you know, or other, you know, people experience in their own culture, and so are trying to say, no, this has got to be the thing, this is the one and only. You know, I think there's I think this is a internet term, the one true sociopath. You know, I am, or this person is, you know, nobody else is the one true sociopath except this. So I think it's interesting to talk to you, so interesting to talk to you and get kind of like this different perspective about how different things would look. But let's continue. You said that you're going to talk a little bit about your cancer journey. Do you want to start there? Or do you want to start somewhere else? Uh-oh, hold on. Unmute you.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, I can start that. I think I can talk about how my cancer journey has been different from what normal patients go through. So I didn't even take time off work throughout the whole thing, except when I had my mastectomy. So that was a 2-week off work. And then right now I have my last chemotherapy session in mid-August, and then I'll be done. So like, first of all, I will explain more about why I wanted bilateral mastectomy. So I was sufficiently well informed with my science background about this cancer condition. And I was a 32 double D, which is voluptuous for my petite frame, I guess. And then the tumor occupied a quadrant of my right breast. And had I chosen a partial mastectomy, I would need daily radiation therapy for 2 months and regular mammograms the rest of my life. And I did not want to take time off work for radiation therapy. And then also we know that radiation might cause other cancers.
Right.
Yeah, and then I also do not want mammograms the rest of my life.
Mammograms are terrible.
That, and also it's just low grade radiation, which again, cancer. Yeah, and then also Asian breasts are very dense, and mammograms are not the best at catching tumors in dense breasts, which means I might need regular but less frequent MRI if I keep the other one. And breast implants just come with a lot of unwanted complications, so all of these were a no-go for me. Yeah.
Do you think let's hear how you feel about your breasts, like before and after, I guess, like before surgery, like before you even knew that you had cancer, like what were your thoughts about your breasts? You're like,
they're nice. They're nice. I show them off.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about it.
Do you feel like they were part of you, or did you identify with them at all, or did you feel like you'd be a different person if they changed at all, or?
No, not at all.
Yeah. Did you feel like they reflected on you in any sort of way? Like, oh, these are things that somehow, are like reflecting on you and who you are as a person?
No.
Yeah.
Why would people think that? It's weird.
It's funny because my friend, and I think you read the book, but she's the one whose dad was dying of cancer, right? And she also has, is it the BRCA gene, right? And so she's also kind of been going through like these ideas of like what to do about it, including double mastectomy. And her approach to things was so much different than my cancer scare, which was also breast cancer. They found like a lump in the breast, and they couldn't do a biopsy for some reason, so they had to do a lumpectomy or whatever. And I was like, whatever. Even though I acknowledge that the breasts are like something that other people admire, something other people appreciated about me, at least, that's what people said, if you just take them at their word. I was like, you can just cut them off or whatever, because I mean, they're fine, I guess, but they're extra work. You have to wash them in the shower or whatever. You have to wear bras, which are not comfortable. It's like, if all said and done, I was like, yeah, sure. I was not afraid at all about losing them, but it's been really interesting to kind of like hear her perspective about it, which is very much like, like what's the right thing for me and what's going to help me most psychologically, like a lot of psychological ramifications for things that I would think is just kind of a physical thing. I mean, losing a finger, that would be a big deal. I'd be like, maybe we could try to save that finger.
Yeah, because it has practical value.
Yes, I would probably do daily radiation to save a thumb, for instance, because thumbs are very important.
Yeah.
But in this situation, it sounds like it just was not worth it to you, the breast. They didn't mean enough to you in order to like actually go through this hassle. That's interesting. All right, keep going.
Yeah, and my surgeon didn't want it to proceed before I talked to plastic surgeon to discuss options. So she made me do that, and then I still insisted on doing a bilateral mastectomy. And then she said, why? Like, if you have one kidney that's not working, are you gonna take out both kidneys? I'm like, yeah, but I need kidneys to live. I don't need breast to live.
Yeah.
It makes so sense. And then
Yeah,
she's
that would
like,
be
okay.
weird to have just one. Although I knew I had a work colleague who had just one and was kind of like weirdly flippant about sometimes she would wear a prosthetic for the other one and sometimes not. And I was like, okay, you know, but it's like, what's the point at that point? It's
Yeah,
already kind of like an appendage, and then you're just gonna have it be unequal. You know, it'd be like, I mean, ears serve a purpose, but if you had one ear taken off, maybe you'd be like, you know what, just go ahead and take the other one off so it's symmetrical.
yeah, that's what I think, and that's what finally convinced my surgeon that I'm sure I want to do it.
Uh-huh.
It's more about quality of life. Had
Yeah.
I keep one, that's not what I want to deal with, and then she's okay with that, I
Hmm.
guess. Yeah, and then the week after my diagnosis, I went on a trip that was planned months ago with my husband and his sister and her boyfriend. So they do know that we are polyamorous and I'm sociopath identifying.
Mm-hmm.
And I told my sister-in-law that I wanted a bilateral mastectomy and I wasn't gonna keep my nipples. And she was like, "What? Why? You're gonna look so strange when you take off your clothes." Yeah, and then I replied, "Yeah, but I can have any breast size I want with prosthesis.
Uh-huh.
I can even match the breast size to the clothes I'm wearing,
Yeah.
right? And without it, I can look like a high fashion model." Most of
Yes. That's what I was thinking too. I was like, you know, like big breasts, because I also have like a similar kind of bra size. But they're like a blessing and a curse, I guess. Blessing is like you never have to worry about like these shirts or dresses that you can't fill out. You know, they don't look quite right or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah,
it's a true thing. You know, it's like most of the time I would rather, you know, maybe not have them. I agree with you that that seems like the best of all worlds is just choose every single day what size you want the breast to be for whatever the clothes are that you're wearing, or just don't, and then there you go. That's really interesting. Did you think at all about like other people's reaction? Did that play like a role, like your sister-in-law's reaction or your work colleagues? Like, were you kind of like, oh, you know, like it will be good to play the victim the rest of the time, or not, you know?
no, not really.
Hmm. Just practical, just kind of like,
Yeah,
yeah, that's actually good. I'm glad that I don't think too. I don't think I mean, I didn't play the victim, although I certainly was aware of that, like, you know, well, I could get more time off work to do this other thing. And at the time I didn't particularly like the work I was doing and I got paid the same amount and there were no deadlines or something. So to take work off was literally just like a paid vacation or something.
yeah,
So yeah, I did take that into account, but I didn't go crazy. I just took like a couple weeks off, you know.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it because I have more flexibility at work.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yeah,
because of
go.
the cancer treatment. You're like, oh, I got
Yeah,
an appointment, I have to take off.
yeah,
But your work's a little bit different too, right? Because you know you're still at the stage where you're actually trying to accomplish things that are going to like lay the basis, the groundwork, I guess, for
yes.
yeah,
But
future.
that's why I didn't take time off work. But I just like the flexibility of not having to go in 9 to
Mm-hmm.
5.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Okay, and then I just saw your chat. So keep going about the cancer. Was there anything else about the cancer journey? Oh, you said thanatophobia. I don't even know what that is.
Thanatophobia. It's like fear, phobia of dying.
Oh, and do you have thanatophobia?
Yeah, I do have it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Um, it actually kind of goes away after my cancer diagnosis, which I think is counterintuitive. But
Yeah.
yeah, prior to that, I did have anxiety attacks if I stop and think about dying. But otherwise, I go about my life
Oh, really?
like normal. Yeah.
So this is super different than from me. You know, for me, but this is kind of, I think, a family trait because my brothers are this way too. All of my brothers, they welcome death. It's not as if like, you know, anybody wants to die necessarily, but it's just like, if we die, great, you know, maybe even better, you know, like nobody has a fear of death really in my family. There are a couple people who would prefer it not to be, but like other people have like just honestly like kind of a basically like an even preference, you know, like 50-50 life or or death. So tell me a little bit, and was this the first time you ever experience anxiety about something? Was the fear of death?
Yes. Like my only fear, I guess, is that. And it's funny because I grew up in a Christian family,
Mm-hmm.
so I used to call myself a Christian, and I did not have any fear of dying when I consider myself a Christian.
Mm.
And then that sort of go away as I grew up and get more exposed to other religions, because I do come from a country with many different religions. And once I left home and went to college, I went to international university in my country before coming to the US. So I got exposed to other religions. My ex was a Middle Easterner, who's a Muslim, and then I took like world religion class, and I learned about other religions, and I don't feel like I identify with Christianity. And then it's just slowly from Christianity to theism to agnostic to not believing that God exists. And that's when my fear of dying started to pop up.
I could see that. Yeah. In my family, you know, everybody's basically Mormon, and it's kind of like, well, you know, who cares if you die? Your kind of essence or whatever continues on. And even if it doesn't continue on, even if that's not true, it's like, then who cares? You're not going to miss the life that you had if you're not there to miss it, kind of thing. So, but so you said you had panic attacks. Did you ever like go seek a psychologist or just anxiety attacks? You said, right?
Yeah. No. It's not to the point that disrupt my life. So I can tap out of it. Like when I realize that I'm having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, I can tap out of it and decide, okay, I'm just gonna stop feeling this way and thinking about it. It's not helpful, because if you fear so much about dying and then you spend your life fearing about it and you're not living it out, so I can tap out of it.
Right. So this is kind of actually, do you know the Stoics, the Stoic philosopher? It's kind of a Stoic response, right? And I often think that the Stoics are very similar for whatever reason to the way like a sociopath naturally kind of conceptualizes their own emotions. So yeah, same with me. A couple things about this. Number one is like a lot of times I didn't realize I was having an emotion until I noticed physical symptoms. I was like, okay, but why are my hands shaking then? You know?
Yes,
I don't feel
I'm
nervous.
the same way.
Yeah.
I'm the same way. I will feel cold, and I'm like, no, I'm like, why? Why do I suddenly feel cold? I guess I'm nervous.
Yes. So is that how the anxiety felt, or did this feel different from that?
More intense than that.
Okay. So you're like, now I have a bunch of physical symptoms and they're so strong that they're almost overwhelming. Is it kind of like that? Yeah.
Yes.
And then, but you were still able to kind of like say, okay, but these are just, you know, this is just the body and the lizard mind, we might say, reacting to a particular thing. And so you were able to just kind of conceptualize your way out of it, I guess. Be like, you know, there's actually nothing to fear. That's good. And one interesting thing, maybe this will happen to you, but maybe not. But when I started identifying with my own emotions, right, and Arya kind of has like a similar experience. You're not used to your own emotions, and it kind of feels like you're going through like a little bit of an emotional puberty. In fact, I think that's a very good analogy. And then it's like you don't know what to do with like these it's like puberty. You're like, my body is responding in ways that I'm not familiar with and don't necessarily identify with, you know, but you have to kind of learn to kind of go with it. You know, you have to
Yeah.
learn to understand it and to conceptualize it. But one of the tricky things is, you know, like, but I think this is true of normal people too, is like when you start to kind of identify with your emotions, sometimes it feels like your emotions are like truth, capital T truth. Like, I feel like you hurt my feelings, therefore you are a wrong person, you know. Might be a common one. Or like, you know, I feel slighted, I feel like you offended me, therefore the thing that you said was offensive, you know. And the Stoics are very good about being like, no, your reaction is your own, you know, like just because you got offended doesn't necessarily mean the person said something that was objectively offensive, let's say.
Yeah.
Right. So the Stoics are pretty good about that. But yeah, that was like a really hard thing to kind of like, to go from no emotions to having emotions that I'm identifying with, or not no emotions, but just emotions that I'm mostly oblivious to, is probably the best way to describe it. To having like
Yeah.
actual emotions was like, wow, okay, this is very complicated now to figure out what to do with these, you know. Like, they're giving me some information, that's true, but they're also giving me a bunch of information, you know. There's a high, what do we say, a low signal to noise ratio, you know. There are a lot of noise, very noisy kind of pieces of data, you know, that you have to kind of like sift through and figure out what's actually going on. And that's like a weird process to have to like learn in your 30s, I
Yes.
thought.
Yeah, I've been telling my empath friends that I don't really know how to recognize my emotions. Like, I know I feel something sometimes. I don't know what exactly I'm feeling or where it's coming from. And they find it very strange that I will have trouble identifying my own emotions.
But it sounds like maybe you're becoming even more aware of that, like even more
Yeah.
aware of the fact that you're not aware of your emotions, you know? Yeah.
Yes.
And how does that feel?
It's fun. I guess
Uh-huh.
it's fun to go through. That's
That's
about it.
that's how I felt too. In the book, I say, like, you know, if I could kind of like flip a switch and go to normal, I would do it, because it's just, it would be nice to just do something different for a change.
Yeah. I want to know how different it is.
Yes, yes. So I now it's kind of hard for me to flip a switch and go entirely without emotions. I don't know if I'll ever be able to go that way, because I've kind of like, you know, it's like, I guess when you're pregnant or something, your body, your skin stretches out and it will never go back to normal. So but yeah, it has been really interesting. You know, for some people, I think it's worse. And I actually think this is kind of an interesting thing I've just been thinking about. When some people go through this whole period of identifying with their emotions, I've noticed this, I would say about 10 to 20 to 30% of the people that I have met are in this category where it's very traumatic for them, and they actually have almost PTSD like symptoms, because they're not just identifying with emotions that are happening to them now, but they're identifying with very traumatic experiences that they had mostly as children. And so they're just like, you know, they're very it's a very traumatic time for them to go through this period of like starting to identify with their emotions. And it's a little bit hard to predict who these people are, but one thing that I have kind of noticed is, and this is kind of like something that Paula has mentioned before, is that there's like a little bit of a link between obsessive compulsive personality disorder, I believe, and psychopathy, right? Like even my own therapist, who was always my most recent therapist, there was another person who diagnosed me, yes, but then my most recent therapist was like, you know, I'm hesitant to diagnose you with anything other than personality disorder, otherwise unspecified. You know, he said, but there are kind of like three aspects to what's going on with you. One is kind of an Asperger's thing. One is kind of obviously antisocial personality disorder. And then he's like, the third is kind of a little bit obsessive compulsive personality disorder. And I think the interesting thing about that, because I've met some other people who are like, you know, they're maybe like kind of straddling the fence of OCPD and ASPD. And those people tend to be the ones who have had like these traumatic childhood experiences, right? Like if a psychopath was just kind of like, you know, created because whatever reasons, maybe not like hugely environmental, but more genetic or whatever reasons, or maybe
Mhm.
just, you know, a sickness when they were young, you know, but not necessarily like their primary caregivers are being like actively, shall we say, like abusive to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but if they did have that situation where they like experienced abuse in their childhood, then they also tend to have OCPD tendencies. One of which is to just be like very compulsive and obsessive about like orchestrating their life. Is kind of the phrase that my therapist
Mhm.
used and the word that other therapists have used that people have relayed to me. So you're just kind of like trying to control everything.
Yeah.
You know, you're trying to almost obsessively compulsively kind of like, what do people say in the military? They say situational awareness, right? Even when you sit down
Mhm.
in a restaurant, you know where the exit is, you know how many people are in the room. You know, you're just constantly
Yeah.
aware of everything that's happening around you because you're at like a very pretty high base, even though you don't experience it because you're like a psychopath, but you're pretty high kind of fight or flight kind of
Yeah.
response
Yeah.
level, like
Yes.
constantly like hyper reactionary, let's say.
Mm.
And not super reactionary, but you know, you're kind of like prepared for bad things to happen. I think because you have been exposed to so many bad things happening to you, especially in your
Yes.
childhood.
I find that people find it weird that I don't listen to music. Like usually people during commute to work or from work back home, they listen to music or whatever.
Hmm.
I don't. I just have to. I prefer to be alert about my surroundings.
Oh, really? Interesting. So
Yes.
you are that way. So you would identify with that type of experience then?
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
interesting.
I'm always alert during my commute. I really don't really listen to music that much in my
Well,
life.
Well, and then feel free to kind of like sidestep this question, but do you feel like you are that type of psychopath that there were like kind of highly traumatic things that happened to you in your childhood?
I don't think so. My childhood is pretty mediocre.
Okay, all right, interesting.
Apart from, I mean, physical punishment is common in Asian families, so I don't think I get it more than other normal Asian family would do.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think so. I don't think it traumatized me in any way. And it's interesting when you say people like process past traumas, because I've been watching interviews with people who were sexually assaulted when they were children,
Mm-hmm.
and then most like it's almost like when they were going through it, they didn't understand what was going on, and they were like fine that way until they grew up and got exposed to sex, and then they suddenly thought back and realized that, oh, I've been sexually assaulted, and that's usually when the trauma or the PTSD and all the emotional reactions start.
Right.
And I find it very interesting.
Yeah, it is really interesting, right? Especially, I mean, it kind of makes sense in both situations. You have like, if you were traumatized in a way that you did not have the emotional language or tools or kind of like self-perception, self-awareness, right, to kind of
Mm.
conceptualize it at the time, then you wouldn't be able to process those emotions. But it's really interesting that the emotions still happened. They just happened without you being aware of them. And so when you do become aware of those emotions, you have to go back and kind of process that. I know, I think that's, I mean, I would say that's probably 80 to 90% true. Like most psychologists would agree with what I just said. But I also think that it's interesting that they've done kind of research. I talked about this in another kind of series that we've been
Mm.
doing, the Bruce Hood book, The Self Illusion. And he kind of talks
Mm.
about
Mm.
like why we don't remember when we were 1 years old or like younger. We don't remember when we were a baby. And he said maybe one of the reasons why is because since we didn't have a sense of self, you don't develop it until you're about 2 years old, that we had no kind of scaffolding or framework with which to kind of attach any sort of meaning to the memories. And without that ability to kind of process those memories in an emotional or kind of psychological identity-based way, then they just disappeared. You know, they're like inaccessible to us because we're not able to think anymore like that infant that we were. You know, and that happens to me too. Like when you're traveling, you suddenly remember other things about other times when you've been traveling or whatever. Sometimes you have to like be in that mindset in order to access certain memories. So that made sense to me. But I thought, okay, so once you do kind of start identifying with your emotions, you are in the mindset to start, you know, thinking about emotions and what happened to you, you know, emotionally. Then suddenly you have to deal with all this past trauma. It's a really interesting aspect of, I think, psychopathy and some of these other like disorders that involve childhood trauma that people don't really think about or talk about as much. But that's been one of the more interesting things I've found in like meeting all these different psychopaths, is like, how do they relate to their emotions once they start feeling emotions, or once they start to kind of realize that they don't feel emotions. But you wrote me in your email about primary versus secondary emotions. Did you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so this came from a discussion my friend, after listening to the first part of our interview, asked me. So he asked, like, how can you not be jealous in a polyamorous marriage or whatever? Like, how can you not feel jealous? I'm like, what is jealous? Is jealous like insecurity that someone's gonna have what you want to keep for yourself, or someone has something that you want to get? So it like, it's like you're upset because you're insecure that you're losing that thing or not getting that thing. And then so the conversation pans out to like primary and secondary emotions. So apparently secondary emotions are from primary emotions. For example, you feel angry about something, and then you feel embarrassed that you're angry about something. So anger is the primary, and then embarrassment is the secondary emotion. And then I feel like I don't have secondary emotions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I first learned about that distinction, I was like, okay, yes. And the primary ones I do have, or I can recognize in myself. And the secondary ones I do not, or I can't recognize in myself.
Yeah. And then we're talking about like frustration, disappointment. And then I was asking him, like, isn't disappointment just like sadness because you don't get something you expect?
Yeah.
And then frustration is just anger in a specific circumstance that people would call frustration. And then he's like, no, it's different. Like, are you sure it's different?
So one thing that Arya has told me, she just like a couple of nights ago was like, oh, I had like a little bit of insomnia in the night. And she's like, and I think I experienced nostalgia for the first time. Do you know what nostalgia is, Victoria?
Yes, yeah.
Because this whole time she's always asked kind of like, is this what people mean when they say nostalgia? Like she's brought it up like maybe once every 6 months or something, you know. It's like she's definitely like, I know nostalgia is a thing. I have never experienced it before. And she was like, yeah, when she experienced it, she was like, it was so weird. I was just remembering what it was like to be with one of my college roommates, you know, and like the house that we lived in, and it was a cool house and people coming over or friends, and it was nice. I was like, yeah, it sounds like you were experiencing nostalgia. Cool.
Yeah. And it's funny, last time you mentioned is hunger, like low blood sugar, because that's how I experience it. Like when I was growing up, my mother is always kind of frustrated because when she asked me, are you full, are you hungry, I would tell him I don't know. And even until now, hunger is when I start shaking from low blood sugar. That's how I know I'm hungry.
Yeah, that is funny, because another thing with Arya that used to kind of annoy me, because she'll get hangry, you know, hungry, angry.
Yeah.
She will get hangry. And I'm like, have you ever thought about being a little bit more proactive about your eating? Like not waiting till it's an emergency and you're like shaking in order to suddenly we have to stop whatever we're doing.
Yeah.
Like, have you ever thought about just bringing snacks with you or like eating on a regular schedule? It is kind of funny how like oblivious we are to like our own internal processes, but it makes sense because like when you think, I think it makes sense when you think of like a psychopath as having a personality disorder, as somebody who has like some difficulty in relating to their own self, their own identity, their own
Mm.
personality, that there would be these kind of like manifestations of it in which the physical and the kind of like mental don't always sync up, you know. And I know that's common in other disorders, or even like other people just have like a harder time with it, right? But it is a very, let's say, common and consistent trait, I think, amongst the psychopaths I've met. So we have a quick
Yeah.
question. It says, okay, after reading some books, I can say that I'm better at manipulating and playing with people than before. So that after reading a lot about psychopaths, she feels like she's getting more and more psychopathic. And at the same time, my life is adopting some psychopathic patterns more deeply, like change jobs a lot, but making more money as well, because I think I'm becoming a high functioning psychopath. Does that happen to you? So I guess the question is kind of like, the more you kind of think about being a psychopath, does that make you more psychopathic?
I think so.
I think so too, probably initially, because there's like the, okay, free to be kind of whatever we are, you know, and
Yeah.
so that there is an embracing it. I think though, and there's only 20 more seconds, but I think there's after a while though, you start to also be like, well, maybe if I'm this way, there's also a possibility of being slightly different, you know, like slightly
Yeah.
different from the way I've
Yeah.
just been programmed to be, or genetic. So I think at first there is more, you're more psychopathic, but I think maybe you start to become more individualistic and less kind of like a stereotype of a psychopath, and more just kind of like your own version of it.
Yeah, I think that's true.
All right, everybody, that's it for today. Thanks for showing up, and we'll see you next week, I think, again for Blake. We'll try to schedule Blake